Today we are returning to Prismatic Hunter and taking a look at the new exotic Gifted Conviction, which when we were shown this exotic I thought it was the weakest out of the bunch because it didn't really look all that impressive, but I was wrong. With this build we're looking at today, we're going to be able to get an absurd amount of damage reduction, go invisible, weaken targets, jolt everything. We're going to get void overshields along with restoration and become radiant as well as amplified. This build has a lot to offer, but before we go over everything, please consider subscribing as it helps me out and the channel a ton. Also, liking the video is a huge help, so please do that as well, and comment what you think about this exotic down below. So let's get started. As I mentioned, today's build is going to include the new exotic chest armor for hunters, Gifted Conviction, and it comes with the exotic trait, the Gift of Certainty. Activating Ascension or Tempest Strike throws bouncing explosives at nearby targets that jolt and damage them. Jolting nearby targets grants you damage resistance. Since we're on Prismatic, we do not have Tempest Strike, but luckily we do have Ascension. When we use Ascension, we're going to drop 3 tracking projectiles that will jolt targets on hit, and when we jolt a target we get a stack of damage resistance, and the amount of stacks we get depends on how many we jolt, up to 4 stacks. I will also say that the damage resistance stacks on new instances of jolting a target. You can't double dip on the same target with 2 different sources of jolt. It really only counts new sources of jolt, which is good because the stacks of damage resist we get from jolting targets can trigger off of anything that causes jolt, not just the jolt from Ascension or Tempest Strike. And also you do have to be kinda close for this to count. I want to say within 5 meters, but with this build we're going to be able to easily achieve that and stay alive in high-end content, which is going to be really good. For weapons, we're gonna want to use things that have Volt Shot, a perk that allows us to jolt targets after we reload from getting a defeat. There are a ton of very good options that have Volt Shot. We have things like Icolos SMG and Subjunctive, which are anti-barrier this season, which is a huge help. We have Path of Least Resistance and even the new Rainbow Non-Denouement, and honestly there are even more than that. For me personally, for this build I used a Stasis SMG. This was just to help out that dark meter for Transcendence, and looking back on it I wish I would have used the new Stasis Aerial Denial Frame grenade launcher instead, but most importantly I used Indebted Kindness. This is an arc rocket assisted frame sidearm we get from the Warlord Ruins dungeon, and it can roll lead from gold and Volt Shot, meaning running double special is something that can be easily done with this setup. And again, we can get our damage resistance from jolting targets, which we can do from this weapon, and it works so good. And it's really easy because these rocket assisted sidearms are amazing in basically any content. So with this being arc and Volt Shot, we're going to be able to get that resistance very easily. For heavy, you can run something that just hits really hard. It doesn't need to have Volt Shot because Indebted Kindness is going to be doing all that heavy lifting for Volt Shot for us, so you can run a grenade launcher, a linear fusion rifle, just about anything you want in your heavy slot just to deal with those big chunky targets. For our class setup, we're on Prismatic, so let's go over everything. For our super, we're taking Golden Gun because even without Nighthawk it is still pretty good. For dodge, you should take Marksman Dodge to have the faster cooldown. I used Gamblers thinking I would get my melee back, and I was wrong. For our melee, I took Snare Bomb to add some weaken into the mix, and I also used Arc Bolt Grenades, which you can use whatever you want for your melee and grenade combo. For our first aspect, we're taking Stylus Executioner. Defeating a target afflicted by any elemental debuff grants invisibility and true sight. After performing a Stylus Execution, your next melee attack while invisible weakens targets. Jolt is an elemental debuff, and since we're going to be jolting everything as much as we can to get our damage resistance, we will in turn be going invisible at all times thanks to how this works on Prismatic with any elemental debuff. Next, we're going to take Ascension. While airborne, consume your class ability energy to summon your arc staff, propelling yourself upwards, creating a burst of around you that amplifies allies and jolts targets. This is one of the aspects related to the exotic itself, so of course we're going to take it. With this, we're going to be able to make ourselves and allies amplified, which will work with an artifact mod, and we're going to jolt things, not even including what we can do from the exotic, meaning we're going to get our stacks of damage resistance very quickly. For our first fragment, we're going to take Facet of purpose. Picking up an Orb of Power grants either Amplified, Restoration, Frost Armor, Woven Mail, or Overshield based on the damage type of your equipped super with a -10 to our recovery. This fragment is why we're taking Golden Gun, so we can give ourselves Restoration when we pick up an orb, and Restoration is still a very good buff to have for health regeneration, but you can honestly pick any super you want as all the buffs are really good. Just try to avoid Storm's Edge so we don't accidentally double dip into Amplified. Facet of Hope: while you have an elemental buff, your class ability regenerates more quickly. We're going to have so many elemental buffs that this is basically going to be up at all times, giving us that increased regeneration, allowing us to use Ascension more often. Facet of Dawn: powered melee hits against targets make you radiant. Powered melee final blows make you and nearby allies radiant with a -10 to strength. When we throw our snare bomb and it goes off, not only will it weaken those targets, but it's also going to give us radiant, which is a very nice buff to have for our weapons and is going to play off the artifact as well. Facet of Dominance: your void grenades weaken targets and our arc grenades jolt targets with a -10 to discipline. We're running arc bolt grenades, so this can help out with spreading that extra jolt and giving us more damage reduction, or you can run magnetic grenades and apply more weakens. Both are really great options. With us causing so much jolt, which counts as light damage, and defeating targets with it, and our arc weapons in general, we're going to get our melee back incredibly fast, allowing us to throw it more often to weaken targets and give us radiant, which is going to be amazing when we pair it with things from our artifact mod. Another thing you can do with this class setup is remove Facet of Dominance, put on Facet of Protection, and run grapple grenades instead, because this way you can get in there, do your melee attack, which is also really good because if you're invisible when it happens, you're going to then apply weaken to that target from Stylus Executioner. And this was another setup that I really enjoyed running with this build because you can also grapple into Ascension, which is also just really fun. For our armor mod, starting with our helmet, we have Arc Siphon, so our arc weapons can make us Orbs of Power. Special Ammo Finder, because of my indebted kindness, doesn't have lead from gold, but if yours does, run Heavy Ammo Finder, and then the Scout mod that goes with your finder to give your allies more ammo as well. For arms, we have Bolstering Detonation, so our grenade hits will give us class ability energy back, and Focusing Strike, so our melee will also give us class ability energy back, paired with an arc loader because we're going to be reloading a lot and quite frequently to make the most out of Volt Shot. For chests, we have our usual resist mods. Change them as you see fit for your activity you're running. For legs, we have Elemental Charge, so any ionic trace we pick up counts towards our armor charge stacks, and then 2 arc weapon surges to make our arc weapons do more damage. For our cloak, we have Reaper for orb creation, Time Dilation so our armor charge stacks fall off slower, and I have Font of Restoration as recovery isn't a focus for stats, and that really helps out a ton because my recovery is really bad with this build, so I took this to help my recovery. You do not have to take this. You can swap this out for something like Outreach, Bomber, Distribution, anything like that, so when we use our actual dodge, we can actually get some ability energy back. For artifact mods, we're gonna start with Authorized Mods Elemental Charge, and then Elemental Siphon, Void Hegemony, Radiant Orbs, Galvanic Armor, Expanding Abyss, and Shield Crush. These all play a huge part in this build and make this build feel really good. For stats, Resilience and Discipline were things that I focused on for the already good damage resistance and potential jolting from arc bolt grenades. Then Mobility and Strength for faster cooldowns on both our class abilities so we can get more Ascension and our Snare Bomb, and then Recovery and Intellect, as again, recovery for me in PvE is more like we're just going to run Devour or Orb pickups, or there's going to be something that's going to give us our health back, and Intellect because, again, tons of orbs on the field, we're going to get our super back very fast. Overall, I'm very surprised with how this build performs, and I really enjoyed it. I went into making this build thinking like, oh, it's not going to be that great, and this build is actually really good. I ran this in a Grandmaster with the grapple grenades like I mentioned earlier, and it performed pretty well. There were some sketchy situations where when I grappled and meleeed, I didn't defeat that target, and then I have to use my Ascension, and I wouldn't get as much damage resistance. There's a lot of hoops to jump through to make the grapple grenade work perfectly in that super high-end content, whereas alternatively, with the arc bolt grenades, you just throw it, things get jolted. If you're nearby, you get your damage resistance. Overall, though, this build is really good, and I really enjoyed it, so I'm going to leave the dim link down in the description for you guys to check out. But with that, please, like I mentioned earlier, subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff, and I will see you guys in the next video.